Hello, everyone. So, welcome back to the second episode of the Commentary Podcast. I'm Tina.
I'm Julia.
I'm Dorothy.
Today, we're going to be talking about classism at Andover. And before we get into it, as a reminder, our conversation reflects our own experiences and opinions and do not represent the board of the Phillipian.
Or anyone else in our socioeconomic class, for that matter.
Good point.
Yeah, so I'm Julia. I'm an upper from the Bronx, New York. I am a prefect in Paul Revere. In the Bronx, New York, I live with my mom, just my mom, and I went to New York City public school growing up, and then through the help of a scholarship program, ended up in Andover. So I would say I'm a part of the lower middle class. And I'm also on the board of CAPA, which is Classism at Andover, or Classism at Phillips Academy. And every other Monday, we talk about classism in CamD.
I'm Dorothy. I am an upper from Portland, Oregon. I would say I'm part of the upper middle class. I grew up in a two-parent home that we owned, and I went to a small public school that was not accessible for everyone, but it was public. And I came to Andover with the help of a merit scholarship.
Yeah, so I'm Tina. I am also an upper. I am from the Bay Area in California, and I am very, what's the word? Very clearly upper class. No question about that. Yeah, I've attended a lot of private schools, like international schools and just private day schools in California. I used to live in Beijing. My family has moved mostly to Shanghai, but we still live in the Bay Area as well. And I'm here without financial aid. I am not the first in my family. My brother was a new lower here a couple years ago, but yeah.
So one of the questions that we have begun a lot of CAPA meetings on is, why is class so hard to talk about? And one of the biggest reasons that has generally been the consensus is that it's so different for everybody and it's generally very stigmatized. So I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
As I've said in a CAPA meeting before, I think especially at Andover, there's guilt that comes from being rich and shame in being poor, and so everyone wants to think of themselves as middle class, which is obviously not true. And I think it's also just difficult because class is something that, like in a meritocracy, is seen as something that people can control, and how much money you make is supposed to be something that you have power over. And so talking about class is almost like blaming each other for where we are. And obviously when we're kids, we don't control what class our family's from, but I think that stigma is so strong everywhere that it just, nobody has experience talking about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that specifically for my family, a lot of my family members are very comfortable talking about money and I'd say braggy. So it kind of made me sort of turn in the opposite way in the sense that I really hated the attention and I would say that guilt is definitely the right word that comes with being able to say oh, I have this and that you don't have. That just never seemed, or it hasn't in a long time seemed to me like something to publicize.
Yeah, I think that point, everybody wants, especially Andover, I think, but just in my entire life, everybody wants to be the best and have the most of everything. And what, to Dorothy's point, people feel shame about being rich, but they also feel shame of being poor. And I think that's because you either have all of the money or it feels like you have all of the experience regarding issues around class. Because if you're rich, you are, society thinks of you as more powerful because you have more money and therefore can do more things. But at Andover, where a lot of our conversations are about your life experiences and like the hardships that you've gone through to get here, a lot of that can feel like if you didn't have a lot of money, you also went through a lot, which isn't always true.
Like if you're on financial aid, you're supposed to have this whole like sob story about how hard it was to grow up without much money.
Julia has a thinking face on right now.
um, yeah, or just like, or I guess generalizing class, like, if another thing I've talked a lot about is like fluidity within class and like how people of every, I guess, level or like socioeconomic class don't really have the same experience, but a lot of times it feels, or like we think everybody in the same class has the same experiences with it.
Yeah, and I think especially at Andover, there's a lot of variety. Just in Andover, like we have so many types of diversity. People come from so many different places. There's international kids, and even within the upper class people at Andover, there's a huge range. Like there's billionaires and there's people whose families just really prioritize their education. And like the expanse is huge. I've heard so many stories from people that I would never have expected regarding socioeconomic status. And I think it's also weird coming here. Like for me, I grew up middle class. I think we have over time gotten closer to upper middle class, and most of my friends were very similar to me. It felt really comfortable. If anything, I was the quote unquote rich friend, which was more of a joke than an actual reality, but it was like I shopped at these like hippie grocery stores, and so I was the rich one who could afford the healthy food. And like there was very little diversity, and even within that diversity, it was all kind of on the same scale of living. And then I came to Andover and I was like on full financial aid, and I was in this weird spot of like being on FA, which felt very like on the quote unquote poor end of things here, but also I know my situation in life is a lot more comfortable than a lot of other people here. It's just the cognitive dissonance of coming to Andover is like such a completely different scale than our homes.
Yeah, I mean, the Bay Area, like where I live specifically, I mean, first of all, California is notorious for unlivable costs, all across the board, specifically, housing. But I think so, me too, when I was in, even in public school, I would say, the public school I attended was serving largely the immediate community, and the immediate community is like houses that are millions of dollars, just as a baseline. So I think that in time there have been more movements to bring students from other less privileged areas of the Bay and allowing them, or just like bringing them into the school system that is more fortunate, and more well funded. But even so, like I spent so much time in private school really that, I think that has really shifted and just distorted the way that I see class. And like you mentioned, Dorothy, I think part of it also has to do with how much your parents are open to discussing class or how much parents let you in on that. So for me personally, my parents are very open, specifically my mom. She's very open with money, and like she's always been very willing to let us like take money and use it, and sort of been like, this is yours. Like it's her love language really to be like, I'm gonna give you these things. Like she's a true gift giver. Like like that's how she expresses the fact that she cares. And also to your point, I think that's because her experience of wealth has been so different from mine, in the sense that she really had nothing like as a kid. And so for her, like the ability to give all of anything, is her way of professing like, I love you so much that I give you anything that you could possibly want. And like my way of treating class and reacting to money is kind of a response to the way that she's raised me. And even within my family, I think that's created a lot of perspective differences and ways that we don't see eye to eye because my brothers and I have never experienced that kind of poverty.
Yeah, I think that this like difference in how people grow up in regards to money also makes this like class different or a difficult topic of discussion because especially Andover, as Dorothy was saying, where it's literally an intentionally diverse space, like socioeconomic class is a very hard thing to assume of other people, especially at a boarding school where everybody is given like generally the same rooms and like yeah, you can decorate it, but like the only way to really show your class is like sometimes how you dress, but even that like you can pass a certain class or you can perform in a certain way, and also like you can't really assume that either like in any regards. So like it's like me, I grew up in the Bronx and everybody at my school was kind of like in the same boat as I was with class, so I didn't really have to like think about what it would be like to be in an entirely different situation. And like at Andover, that is much different. And I think a lot of kids come from this perspective of, or come from the space of like, everybody around me is like me. But then they come to Andover and that shifts. And then it's like, how do I talk about this difficult topic that like is a big factor of many people's lives without like saying the wrong thing, or like what even is the importance of talking about class, or like how do I do it, or like what is the benefit, and like finding how to do that in a diverse space is hard when you've never experienced a diverse space before.
Yeah, and I think at Andover, a lot of like what Tina was saying, like a lot of classes not, or no, Julia, you said like you can pass as a different class if you want to. And I definitely know people who like dress up or down and like just hide their money or hide their lack thereof. And I think that kind of points out that like a lot of class and how we treat it at Andover is very cultural. And I think like the values we bring from our socioeconomic class and the experiences we have are a really big way that it affects us. And I think that is a lot of why there's a social divide at Andover surrounding class, because people just are able to relate to other people who have had similar experiences and whose families have the same lifestyles. And like me, for example, a lot of my friends are on financial aid, and like over half the school is not. So obviously I'm missing out on some people. But it just like that's kind of my bubble, I guess. And it's like Tina, you're one of pretty few friends that I'm close with who are like rich, and you don't talk about it very often. And I feel like it's just, for me, like people kind of drift towards each other in the like terms of the way we've been raised.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, wait. On that question of performance, I guess, like I'm wondering if you think that performance does change the way that you see someone, and then I guess correspondingly, if you do realize that they are not the class that I assume them to be, does that again change the way that you perceive them?
I think it's an interesting like circumstance when it happens. I both understand it but also like wonder why. Like I feel like I guess I can understand. It's just easy to pretend to be a certain way when you're surrounded by people who you want to think of you as the same as them. And like there's a lot of just intentional exclusion of like your thoughts or experiences that can lead people to assume a lot of things. I don't really care if somebody like pretends to be a different class, but it's kind of interesting to examine that and be like, why can't you, like, what's stopping you from accepting that and utilizing it and using your privilege or contributing to the conversation versus trying to fit into something that you aren't?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just like like the way in people perform, because there's not an actual set way that everybody from a socioeconomic class does act. Like it's just perceived class values that are like widely accepted of the world, I guess, that we just like assume. And a lot of it is we assume it from what we see in media and like what we see, or actually probably a lot of it's from what our parents say about certain groups of people, and also the media and like movies and TV shows and like also something we talked about in last week's CAPA meeting actually was social capital and like the different, I guess, aspects of socioeconomic class, like the actual money aspect, but also like the part in which connections matter, and like who you know and like the spaces in which you're comfortable, because like maybe you were in a very high socioeconomic class and then you lost all your money, but you still know all those people who can help you like get back up there. And I think that's part of the reason why some people specifically at Andover perform, I guess, or just like adhere to the stereotypes of higher classes, because you know, or you are able to then know and closely fit in with people who know more people, and then you know more people, and then it kind of sets you up on a successful track that for a lot of people, like the social capital is why they come here, and it's a very valuable experience. We're like part of Andover.
Yeah, I feel like we've been very general so far, and we did commit to using I statements. So, what are your guys' experience with being your specific class at Andover?
But I think the biggest impact of my class and being in Andover is like taking advantage of the opportunities that you're presented. And maybe that is not always great, because I think at Andover in general, there's a very big culture of taking on too much. And I think especially when you're a student coming from a lower income background and you're like, this is the 4 years, or these 4 years could be like the biggest 4 years of my life. Like this is where I can meet the biggest people with the biggest opportunities for me, and I could set myself up and I could do the most for this campus and then go to a really good college and then get a really good job. But it all happens in these 4 years. So I have to do everything now. And I think that can turn into a harmful mindset, but like it's just overwhelming from the very beginning, regardless.
Yeah, I can say, as someone who's been bouncing around the middle class most of my life, I think coming to Andover, my family kind of had to start reckoning with the fact that I was going to be around really rich people a lot. And it was interesting because I realized that, like, personally, and I think for other middle class people, like, there's this almost disdain for like the very upper echelons of society. And like I know, for example, like my family a few years ago joined a tennis club because my mom got back into tennis, thanks to me, by the way. And my dad had a very weird reaction to it. He grew up lower class, so I think that like that was also part of it, but he was like, oh, we're joining a tennis club. We're like country club people now. Ew. And then when I came to Andover, he was like, oh my God, everyone's going to be so stuck up and rich. Like, why do you even want to go to this school? And I mean, he went to a private school in the Bronx he was on full financial aid, and he was like one of very few, and he got super bullied for it. So that's his like view of like rich people, is like these terrible people who are just like in this bubble and they don't understand what it's like to be from a lower class. But we also, I think my family really values like high quality education and opportunities, but we like, it's like high but not too high. Like Tufts but not Harvard, because everyone's preppy at Harvard and you wouldn't fit in at Harvard and you wouldn't like it at Harvard. But like if it's, you just need to go to a pretty good college and get a pretty good job.
My parents definitely, like, I've heard my mom say this to me on multiple occasions. It's like, we do all we do so that, like, when you get older, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to work a day in your life, and you can be fine. You're going to be happy. You're going to have money. You're going to be fine. And, like, sometimes like I'm at Andover and she's like, Tina, why are you doing so much on campus? Like, what is this for? Like, we've set you up. You're good to go. Like, you can be happy. Like, you can do whatever you want because we've given you, like, you have access to the best already, pretty much. And like, there's definitely like a totally different way of seeing like everything needs to be the best for you. Like, I will give you everything that I possibly can give you. That's definitely something my parents have always emphasized. So, like the best school, specifically the best, environment. Like, part of the reason that we moved from Beijing to California at all was because my parents wanted us to live in a place that wasn't polluted so that, because my brother was having health issues because of the pollution in the air, and also that we could get a better education. And even when my family wasn't as wealthy, like, I don't really have clear memories of it, but it wasn't like my mom definitely does. And like, she used to just like do anything in her power to make sure we could go to the best schools that she could find. Like, anything else did not matter. And even like moving to America, like leaving her family and her culture and like her language behind to come to a place where she doesn't really speak the language very well, like all so that we can have the best and be the best and like really enter and be a part of the upper class, like the upper class, and have access to any resources and like, everything.
Yeah, I think my experience with class, like in transitioning to Andover, also was affected, I guess, a lot by the scholarship program I was part of, and it was all like lower income, mostly Black and Latina students from New York City or like areas very close to New York City, and like everybody there went to one of the best boarding schools, and like from a not so great New York City public school to literally the best schools in the country. And like
Everyone in the program, not
yes,
everyone at your school.
no, yeah, everyone in the program. And like there's a 14 months of that program that is dedicated to you catching up with the kids that are going to be at your school. And like I think that experience like mostly prepared me for like all of the stuff I do on campus now, because it's like those 14 months are literally the hardest 14 months of your life, because you're doing everything at a much faster pace than you have ever been used to, and you're being told that once you get to those schools, everybody is going to be super classist and they're all going to hate you because you're poor and it's going to be horrible, but you're going to go to a really good college and you're going to have money and you can send your kids to a better school, so it's all going to be okay. And like I think definitely not the most healthy environment, but also really did prepare me for Andover, because there is a good deal of classism, and if it's not explicit, it's very prevalent, very there. And
I wouldn't say prevalent. I would say present.
present. Okay, it's present, and also just the competitive environment of like I always need to be the best, do the best,
I
be
think
at the
about
best.
that a lot. Like, I think about this all the time, is how I just like, because of the way my parents framed their like parenting, I just like have always had access to the best resources for especially and specifically learning. Like, I've always cared about learning. I've always been told that learning is like the best. My dad is a professor. Like, we're all about education, and because of that, like coming here, I recognize that like I have like an incredible advantage, like a lifelong advantage, because I've just always, this is what my whole life has been about. Like, this has been the only thing that I dedicate myself to, and that's at the at the wishes of my parents. And to me, there's this conversation that goes on a lot on campus where people are like embarrassed about lower math levels specifically. You're learning, and that's okay. And to me, I don't want to say always, but so often I see somebody who's in a high math level, and it's clear to me that that's because their whole, like, they've had all the access to resources they possibly want to learn and dedicate themselves to math. Like, it makes sense that they're good.
Yes. First of all, I'm a prefect in obviously a lower class dorm, and I think this year I've really recognized the difference of perspective and just maturity between freshmen and uppers. And I think one of the ways I've recognized that is how people at school, specifically freshmen and uppers, or like freshmen and upperclassmen, view grades and placement. Because I think Andover does a relatively good job at talking about hard issues, and like class is not the most talked about, but it is talked about. It's
Agree to disagree.
Yeah, it's talking about
In
more.
Kappa.
Yeah, you hear it, and at some point in your Andover experience, you consider it. At least 50% of the school does. Okay, that's okay, and
She means those who are on financial aid.
and I feel like I didn't really think that would change when I first got here. Like, I think I came to this school and I was surrounded by obviously very smart people who were in higher math levels. And yeah, as Tina said, like, that definitely was because they had the resources to get there. But like, I thought it was always something that like I was going to have to be sad about. Like, oh, wow, like my middle school didn't have algebra. So now I'm always going to be like 2 years behind everyone else. And I'm never going to be able to talk about math. But like, I think just being able to have the discussion about class and how it impacts your life growing up and like in the context of Andover, specifically your academic life, is very helpful in like understanding why or like where people end up, I guess.
Yeah. And I think we're running out of time, but just to wrap up, I feel like building off of what both of you guys said, like, I think I haven't experienced any overt classism at Andover. Nothing that is like antagonistically anti lower class or anything. Like, people aren't really that intentionally mean, I guess. I don't know about you guys. I haven't experienced it. But what I have experienced is a lot of ignorance-based classism and people who just don't understand how rich they are or what life could possibly be like for anyone else.
Yeah.
Or the fact that I can't actually DoorDash 3 times a day with you. I'm sorry. But I would love to have a sip of your bubble tea. And and this also manifests in stuff like placements. Like, it's just like the math thing seems like theoretically it might be academic, but really what gives you these objective math skills is having had the math classes and the education and the like extra, I don't know, like doing math competitions growing up, and like all that stuff is like very financial. And so your like literacy in that thing is very financial. And so even if you're not explicitly feeling shame about the money part of it, it's very all tied up in it. Yeah.
Everything is all tied up in money
Wow, that's deep.
all the time.
Wow.
Any last words?
Thank you for listening. And if you want to be added to the email list, you can email Carmona24 at Andover.
We'll put that in the description.